In the spring of 1948, a disastrous combination of events led to a deadly flood that wiped Oregon's second-largest city completely off the map in the span of just a few hours. With scores of people left homeless by this abrupt tragedy, the now former residents of Vanport, Oregon would have to contend with government corruption and the state of Oregon's darkest secret. In 1940, American industrialist and entrepreneur Henry J. Kaiser penned an agreement to build 31 cargo ships for the British Navy, which would be used to assist in their war efforts. In order to facilitate this venture, he opened the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland, Oregon, which would draw its power from the newly completed Bonneville Dam just to the east on the Columbia River. It was a great success. While primarily using only unskilled labor, the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation built ships 75% faster than other shipyards in the country. An unsurprising fact, considering Kaiser's well-known reputation for completing projects on time and under budget, including coordinating the construction of engineering marvel, the Hoover Dam, which was built in only half the time it was originally expected. Naturally, as the US entered into World War II in December of 1941, the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation was an easy choice for being awarded with the building contracts for America's warships. But as the demand for warships grew, so did the need for workers to build them, and as 10 million able-bodied working-age Americans were drafted into the US military during the span of the war, a massive void was left in the country's labor market. The United States faced an unprecedented need for workers, both to satisfy the everyday needs of the American people and to meet the tremendous demands of the ongoing war. With demand for ships high and the market for workers weakened, Kaiser expanded the scale of his search for employees. He began recruiting across the entire United States, offering high wages and free transportation to those who would come to work for him. This led to a dramatic shift in the American workforce. There were now plenty of work opportunities for people who previously had little to no chance at getting them, namely women and ethnic minorities. People flocked in from all over for a chance at the opportunities, but Portland couldn't handle the enormous influx of people. Within a year of starting the new recruiting strategy, around 100,000 out-of-state workers arrived in the city looking for work and for housing. But the scarcity of housing turned into a crisis, and Oregon's dark underbelly began rearing its head. Of the inpouring of new residents, a significant portion of the individuals were black, many of whom were seeking refuge from the harsh and segregated ways of their former homes, especially those coming from the American South. They would quickly learn, however, that this city in the Pacific Northwest was not the haven they were hoping for. Bringing up the topic of racism in the history of the US is likely to conjure images of race riots in Alabama, Tennessee, which was home to the Ku Klux Klan, and Mississippi, which was considered the nation's most segregated state in 1964. But the city of Portland was known as one of the most segregated cities north of the Mason-Dixon line. In fact, at the time of its inception as a state, Oregon was the only state which explicitly forbade black people from living there in its own state constitution. Furthermore, black people were not allowed to work or own property within the state, and they did not have the right to vote until 1927. As they moved into the city, they found themselves unable to secure housing. The Realty Board of Portland's Code of Ethics specifically prohibited realtors from giving loans to blacks for properties in white neighborhoods, which, with only a small group of black people residing there at the time, meant most places in the city. Even today, the majority of Portland's black population lives in the Albina district of North Portland. The demographic makeup of this area, now affectionately referred to as Portland's Soul District, can be traced back to these discriminatory redlining practices. In fact, as recently as 2020, Portland, Oregon was ranked number 4 on US News's list of 10 least racially diverse big cities in the US, with black individuals making up just 6% of the population. Despite the thousands of black Americans pouring in, the city did not want to commit to accommodating them for fear that they would stay permanently. Portland Mayor Earl Riley infamously stated, "Portland can absorb only a minimum number of without upsetting the city's regular life." A similar sentiment was echoed in the Portland-based newspaper, The Oregonian. who stated that black people should be sent here in approximately the same proportions as they exist in the present population. If some such proportions are maintained, it should be a happy solution all around. To put into perspective the proportions they were referring to, the black population in the state of Oregon at the time was 0.2%, or 1 out of every 500 residents. Following the city's inadequate attempt to provide temporary housing for the new workers, Kaiser took matters into his own hands. With assistance from the federal government, he constructed a temporary city to provide housing. The newly built city of Vanport, Oregon, was completed in just 110 days. It was a full community, spanning 640 acres and consisting of over 10,000 apartments, an athletic field, shopping center, theater, and its own schools. Named for its location, sitting between Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, the new city was positioned on marshland near the Columbia River. Because it was built on a floodplain, a system of dikes wrapped around the city to keep it dry. But those same dikes that walled the city also created a sense of entrapment, as described by author Manly Mabin in his book titled Vanport. The psychological effect of living on the bottom of a relatively small area, diked on all sides to a height of 15 to 25 feet, was vaguely disturbing. It was almost impossible to get a view of the horizon from anywhere in Vanport, at least on the ground or in the lower level apartments, and it was even difficult from upper levels. Despite the shoddy construction of the new housing project, at its peak it housed some 40,000 workers. The small city operated for several years, even after the war ceased. However, following Japan's unconditional surrender in August of 1945, the Navy canceled a large portion of ship orders they had placed with the Kaiser Shipyard. This caused Vanport's population to dwindle rapidly over the next few years. The winter of 1947 through 1948 saw a lot of snow, leading to mountain snowpack about twice as high as typical. The snowy winter eventually made way to a warm and rainy spring. Above average temperatures and several heavy rainstorms in the month of May 1948 created exceedingly precarious conditions. By May 25th, the Columbia and Willamette rivers both reached 23 feet, which was 8 feet above flood stage. The city of Vanport already had an elevation 15 feet below the level of the rivers. City officials inspected Vanport's dikes. The Housing Authority of Portland was assured by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that the dikes would hold, and that Vanport would be unaffected by the rising water levels. Regardless of the assurances, the Housing Authority saw it fit to move its files and equipment for protection. They also evacuated 600 horses from the nearby racetrack. Contrary to their own actions, they issued a flyer to the residents of Vanport on the morning of Memorial Day, May 30th, 1948, which read, "Dikes are safe at present. You will be warned if necessary. You will have time to leave. Don't get excited." The dikes gave way that same afternoon. At 4:17 p.m., mere hours after the flyers were issued, a 6-foot wide break occurred in one of the dikes to Vanport's western edge. It quickly grew to 500 feet across, and the water rushed into the city of Vanport. Waves 10 feet in height crashed down onto the city. It took only about 10 minutes for the community to be completely inundated with water. The haphazardly built homes were easily swept away. Oregon's second largest city and the nation's largest housing project was completely ruined in under a day. A combination of poor construction and irresponsible handling by the Housing Authority of Portland exacerbated the extent of the damage. While the population of Vanport had decreased significantly in population from its peak, it was still home to 18,500 residents. However, due to the discriminatory housing market, the black population had stayed roughly the same, and at the time of the flood, black people made up more than 1/3 of the population of Vanport, numbering over 6,000. For days following the disaster, no bodies were recovered. Rumors began spreading that the Housing Authority of Portland was hiding bodies to cover the severity of the situation. Despite the aggravating factors and swirling rumors, the tragedy struck at about the best time possible, if there was such a thing. As it happened to fall on a holiday, on a day where the weather was sunny and beautiful, Many families were out enjoying the weather or out of town visiting family. Still, 15 people died in the tragic disaster, and more than 18,000 were suddenly faced with homelessness. While at first, many of the displaced were taken in by Portland residents, the long-standing housing practices were proving to be significant obstacles to the scores of people now in need of permanent housing. It had always been clear to the residents of Vanport that the discriminatory protocols were alive and well throughout their stay. Although it wasn't officially documented, residents of the city were segregated by color. With nowhere else to go as a result of the unabating redlining policies in the city of Portland, many of the displaced victims were forced to move into the already overpopulated Albina district. For many, the flood that destroyed their homes was just the beginning of the nightmare, as it took them years to find permanent housing. This awful tragedy, however, did ultimately lead the way for some positive gains for the Black community and the country as a whole. Vanport was the first city in Oregon to hire Black school teachers and police officers, opening the door to more opportunities. And 2 years after the event, in 1950, U.S. Congress passed the Flood Control Act of 1950, which set in motion many flood control projects nationwide. The land on which Vanport was once built is now largely empty. A single sign on the land stands in honor of the city of Vanport, offering a brief overview of its history. Additionally, since 2016, the Vanport Mosaic Festival is held annually to commemorate the former city. The tragedy of the Vanport flood clearly demonstrates how nature's unpredictability can test the limits of human resilience, and not just from deadly surging floodwaters. Some arise from the silent, cold stretches of the Arctic. For a bone-chilling tale of adventure, ambition, and Arctic survival, watch my video on the Karluk disaster. Thanks for watching. Until next time.